As someone who loves biopics in general, when I first saw the trailer for Elvis, I was very intrigued. Needless to say, the movie did not let me down. This movie has a lot to love. It's got performances that are great, incredible shots, and the music's, of course, great. The scenes of Elvis performing his biggest songs were full of energy and shot incredibly well. Not only that, but the singing in this film is amazing. They actually used Austin Butler's voice for most of the early songs, and in the later pieces, whenever it was later in Elvis's life, they actually used various techniques to somewhat splice the audio of both performances. Now, the reason that they spliced the two instead of just using Elvis's audio for them is because the audio of Elvis's performances wasn't of high enough quality, and so they had to mix the two in order to get the audio they wanted. This kind of a technique was actually used in Bohemian Rhapsody with Rami Malek playing Freddie Mercury. This film also does a great job of covering all the big beats and moments in Elvis's life and career. And of course, it does all of this with pretty good pacing throughout the movie. Some biopics tend to drag through the slower points in the subject's life, and then they go at the same pace as the slow moments as they are in the fast-paced, important moments in the subject's life. This film doesn't do that. It lets the important moments breathe and kind of air out in a way, while it uses montages and narration to skip the slower moments where there may not be as much going on in that time frame. For example, there's a montage where the first 4 years of Elvis's Vegas residency are just gone by in a few seconds. This allows it to skip slower points in the timeline without ever feeling like it's really hitting the brakes, and it works for the most part throughout the film. The other thing I want to point out about this movie that I think is incredible is Austin Butler's performance as Elvis Presley. I think his performance here is one of the greatest I've seen, not only in a biopic, but in general. Elvis did struggle a lot with fame, expectations, relationships, etc. And you feel that conflict in his performance.
I'm on before the shoot, and nobody's gonna remember me.
Every time he sings and performs in the film, he really is embodying Elvis. There's actually an interesting story about how Austin Butler got cast as Elvis. He actually filmed an audition for the role, singing Love Me Tender. But he said it felt like too much of an impersonation, so he just didn't submit it. But then a few days later, he awoke from a nightmare of his deceased mother dying again, and he was feeling so guilty and sad about it. And so he decided to channel into music and sat down and filmed himself in his robe singing what I think was the most moving song of the entire film, Unchained Melody. And that's actually what got him noticed during casting. There's actually a specific moment when Elvis performs the song Unchained Melody, and in it, they actually switch between the footage from Austin Butler's performance and actual footage of Elvis singing it live. And his performance is so good in the set, the costume, makeup, all of it. But his performance, of course, is the thing that makes it so seamless when they switch that you don't even notice until you're sitting there, you're like, that has to actually be Elvis. The reason it feels so seamless is because he's not doing an impersonation, but it's almost like an embodiment of the person he is playing. On the topic of performances, though, I do feel I need to mention those that I didn't fully appreciate. So Tom Hanks is in this movie. He plays arguably the second most important character in the film, Colonel Tom Parker, the manager of Elvis Presley. Now, Tom Hanks is an incredible actor. Obviously, no one needs to hear that. But his character in this movie often seems one-dimensional and almost cartoonish at times when it comes to his manipulation and scheming that he does throughout the film. I don't think that he does a bad job in the movie, but in a movie where Austin Butler's playing Elvis in a way that humanizes this icon so much, anything that's even slightly over the top seems 10 times more over the top, if that makes sense. But that could also come down to writing, because his character doesn't really have a lot to do aside from manipulation, scheming stuff. Like, there's not a whole lot of moments where you see him not that character, so it could also come down to just not being given anything to work with. And one last thing I want to mention that I did have mixed feelings about was there was some hyper stylized editing and filmmaking decisions made, especially in the early part of the movie. Now, I wouldn't say I dislike the decisions and the things they did with this hyper stylized editing and visual effects and stuff. It was just very jarring to me because I wasn't expecting it. And so in the first 10 minutes when I think it was most heavily used, I was just very much taken out of the movie before it even took off. Because especially in a biopic, you just don't expect these kinds of any sort of real style to it. It's usually, I think biopics, just because of how formulaic they can be, they tend to be very simple in the way they're presented in the execution. And so when you do see something that's hyper stylized, it's immediately takes you back. And so I do think, especially after watching this more times, I'll probably grow to appreciate it more. It was just this first viewing, I didn't expect it. And after seeing the film in its entirety, I do feel much better about it, especially because it's not as frequent later in the film. But also, after seeing the whole film, I've gone back and rewatched some of the scenes, and now that I know what to expect, I do appreciate them a lot more, and it doesn't feel as jarring now that I've seen the full film and understand it. And last thing I will say, I do think the movie was a little longer than it should have been. I think a nice 2 hours, slightly over that mark, would have been really, really good to have a tight movie. I think the 2.5 hours we got was a little bit longer than it should have been. But overall, I think the movie did a really good job of serving its purpose of giving something to any Elvis fan, while also introducing new fans who may not know all of his work. For one, I only knew a handful of his songs for the most part, like half of those came from Lilo and Stitch, but I've spent the entire night, like I watched the movie tonight 6 hours ago, and I've spent all night watching performances of his, listening to his music. I'm sure I'll spend the next few days listening to more of his music and rewatching again and again the live performance of Unchained Melody. So all that said, I think this is a great biopic that respects its subject very much and can easily give it an 8.5 out of 10. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is a new kind of video that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And I just felt like after watching this movie, it was like, I had a lot of thoughts about it. I was like, I guess this just is going to be the one. If you did like it, please leave a like down below. Comment what you thought about the movie if you've seen it. And if there's another movie that's coming out soon or has come out that you want me to review, let me know. And lastly, if you're not subscribed, make sure to. That way you guys know when new reviews and new videos come out. And I will see you in the next one.